If you remember, just a couple of days ago it was reported that the Russian army took control over the city of Severodonetsk. The propaganda started celebrating, saying things like that Russia is fully achieving its goals of denazifying and liberating Ukraine. But recent 3000 IQ move from the Ukrainian army says basically, congratulations, you played yourself. And the result of this move is that Ukrainian army was able to launch at least 2 successful counteroffensive in 2 different regions. So what is this mind-blowing big brain move that Ukrainian army did? What are the results for both Ukrainian and Russian army? And in which areas Ukraine was able to launch this successful counteroffensive? And these are the questions that we'll be talking about in today's video. What's up, investors, Bon Voyager and people of Reddit, it's the Russian Dude and this is your daily update on Russian-Ukrainian war as of Thursday, June 2nd. You can see the main events of the day to my right, along with the timestamps. Alright, so get ready for this. Today, the advisor to the president of Ukraine, our favorite Alexei Arestovich, mentioned that Ukrainian forces were able to do 3000 IQ big brain move. If you remember, in the past, Russia acknowledged that they were able to capture the city of Severodonetsk completely. But today, Alexei Arestovich mentioned that this was the plan of Ukrainian forces all along. What he meant here is that Ukrainian forces surrendered this city so that later on they can trap the Russian army. Because if you remember, the next goal after Severodonetsk for Russian army was to capture the city of Lysychansk, which is geographically higher than the city of Severodonetsk, which from logistics standpoint makes it an extremely hard goal to achieve in military perspective. But wait, there is more, because this plan actually had 2 stages. The first stage was to resist Russian forces in this specific region as much and as long as possible. And because of this, Russian army had to reallocate its forces to the east of Ukraine to make this capture to be successful. Because of this, the presence of Russian army everywhere else across Ukraine became much smaller. And for now, just keep this idea in your mind, because we're gonna get back to this very soon. So the majority of Russian army was relocated to this Donbass region, which is in the east of Ukraine. And because of this, they were, yes, relatively able to be successful in this region. Couple of weeks later of this severe fighting, they were able to acknowledge that finally they were able to capture the city of Severodonetsk, which, as you already know, was the plan of Ukrainian forces all along. And so now, because of geographical reasons, Russian army is actually in a disadvantage. And as for now, Ukraine was already able to launch a successful counterattacks in this city. Arestovich also proceeds that he is not sure whether Ukraine will be able to liberate this city or not, but at this very moment it doesn't matter that much. What matters even more is that at this very moment Russia is bearing significant losses in this territory, and instead of advancing, now they need to fortify this city, which basically completely stops the advancement of Russian army. And now let's get back to this idea that I ask you to keep in your mind, which is basically the idea that Russian forces were relocating all over Ukraine just to the east of the country. What does this all mean? First and foremost, it means that the defense of Russians on already occupied territories is significantly weaker at this very moment. And because of this, Alexei Arestovich also reported that Ukrainian army was able to launch second successful counteroffensive in Kherson region, which is in the south of Ukraine. So here is the summary of this 3000 IQ move from Ukraine. First of all, they were showing significant resistance in the east of Ukraine, which made Russian forces to reallocate the majority of its army to this region. Because of this, they were able to achieve their goals by capturing the city of Severodonetsk, but this was the plan of Ukrainian army all along. So because of this, Russian army is now trapped in this logistical disadvantage, and besides this, the presence of Russia everywhere else across Ukraine is also now limited, which in addition to all that allowed Ukraine to start liberating the south of the country. And just a reminder, all this happened while Ukraine is still waiting for the offensive weapons from the west. And by the way, if you like this style of daily news reporting, feel free to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, please make sure to check the link in the description if you want to receive additional content such as daily Zoom calls and Q&A sessions. All the proceeds will be donated to Ukraine at the end of each month. Thanks so much, and let's continue. Welcome to another episode of Ridiculous Russian Propaganda. And today we have this statement from potential successor of Vladimir Putin, Nikolai Patrushev, who said that now there is a potentially new goal for Russia in this war. He basically said that these were the states who created all the conditions to start the war between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, it doesn't sound better than this if Putin considers you to be your friend. Then he added that America is using all of its influence to create this hybrid war against Russia. And the only reason why they're doing this is to weaken the status of Russia so that America becomes the one and only dominant country in the world. And obviously now the new goal of Russia is to prevent this from happening, and also to put sense back into Ukrainian minds is that they are being manipulated. And the second episode of ridiculous Russian propaganda, which directly confirms the first episode, is this statement by Andrei Isayev, who is the Russian politician, the member of Единая Россия, the one and only political party, who said that Ukrainians are fighting in this war only for US dollar. And I mean, no, they're not fighting for US dollar as for the salary or something like this. No, they're fighting to save the US dollar as the status of the world currency. He then clarifies himself is that basically Ukrainians are being manipulated by America to fight for their own interests. So basically, yes, next time I'm going to be speaking with my Ukrainian uncle, I'm going to ask him whether his friends are fighting for their own friends and family or for the status of US dollar as the world international currency. So place your bets in the comments what's his reply is gonna be. Today there was a poll in Ukraine whether they should legalize the carrying of firearms among civilians. 59% of people responded that they should legalize carrying firearms for civilians, while 22% of people said that they should not legalize this action. And at the same time, 19% of people said that firearms should be legalized, but you don't need to carry them at all times. So if you remember, a couple of days ago, America decided to send high mobility artillery rocket systems called HIMARS to Ukraine. And these artillery systems, they allow to send missiles up to 300 kilometers radius, which basically means in case Ukraine gets access to them, they will potentially be able to strike on the territory of Russia. But knowing this, America decided to limit the usage of these weapons only to 80 kilometers. And the reason for this it is because the states did not want Ukraine to use these weapons on the territory of Russia. They wanted Ukrainians to just use these weapons to protect their own land. So basically, if you put them along the front lines, all the area which is highlighted in yellow can be accessible with the HIMARS systems. And so even though the President Zelensky himself acknowledged that Ukraine is not planning to have combat actions on the territory of Russia, there is another problem which can potentially appear. So you already know that Russia thinks that Crimea is their own territory, and most likely in the nearest future they'll consider the region of Donbass to be their own territory as well. Which basically means if Ukrainians are using these systems on the territory of Crimea or Donbass, Russia might potentially consider this as fighting on the territory of Russia. And in theory, this can create the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. And what's even more, this theory was indirectly confirmed by the ex-president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev. What he basically said that in case Ukraine uses these weapons on the territory of Russia, Russia will have to answer with the preventive measures against the decision-making cities. So obviously he did not specifically said if you attack Donbass or Crimea, we'll have to do this. But from his speech, it was pretty obvious that he was also considering these regions to be already a part of Russia. For this reason, even though Ukraine receives these high-mobility artillery systems, they'll have to be extremely cautious, unfortunately, to use them. Because we obviously know that Donbass is still a Ukrainian territory, but it does not look like this from Russian perspective. In this picture presented to us by the Forbes magazine, you can see the top 7 friendliest countries to Ukraine. The rating consists of different factors, such as for example whether these countries acknowledge that Russia is doing a genocide in Ukraine, how much money these countries send to support Ukraine, and whether higher government officials were visiting Ukraine. The biggest friend of Ukraine at this very moment, according to this poll, is the country of Poland with 97 points. And the second place goes to the United States of America, who has 96 points. So it looks like there could be Azovstal 2.0. And what I'm talking about here is this Azot factory, which is located in Severodonetsk, where at this very moment it is estimated that approximately 800 civilians are hiding beneath it. So basically, yes, if you remember the city of Mariupol, Russian forces tried to capture the entire city. And they were relatively successful except one this territory, Azovstal factory, where basically all the civilians who were not able to escape the city along with the soldiers of Azov battalion were hiding almost since the beginning of this war. And for the last couple of months, this was the only territory that Russian army was not able to liberate to take full control over the city of Mariupol. And now we see kinda something the same. This Azot factory is located in the city of Severodonetsk, which is in Luhansk region, which at this very moment is one of the main priorities of Russia in this stage of the war. And right now now civilians are already hiding there. And I'm assuming as soon as Russian forces will start to advance in this region, Ukrainian army will also start to hide beneath this factory. Which basically means that we might potentially see Azovstal steel factory number 2, where potentially in the future Russian army will have the full control over the Luhansk region except the territory of this factory. So I'll keep a close eye on this situation, and as soon as there are any changes I'll definitely report it. Today the head of People's Republic of Luhansk, Leonid Pasechnik, acknowledged that the main goal of this region will be to join Russia, which is, if you remember, is exactly what basically everyone was expecting from leaders of these regions to say in the nearest future. Because just as a reminder, the way Russia annexes different Ukrainian regions always goes through the same 3 steps. The first step is to send its own infiltrators into these targeted areas. The second step is to somehow separate these regions from Ukraine and proclaim themselves independent. And the third and the final step is to make this referendum about joining Russia. So this is what already the head of Donetsk Republic, Denis Pushilin, mentioned somewhere like last month. He basically also said that the people of Donetsk are considering to do this referendum to join Russia. And now we hear the very same statement from the head of Luhansk region. And no matter whether this is going to happen or not, the result will always be the same. It will only be these regions and Russia who will recognize the results of this referendum, while the rest of the world will still consider these territories to be Ukrainian. But at the same time, I have this statement from the press secretary of Russia, Dmitry Peskov, who said that the referendums in Donetsk and Lugansk are not possible at this very moment. He said that the reason why they cannot be done right now, it is because there is still military and combat actions happening in these regions. Which basically means that they think that they still need to liberate and denazify Lugansk and Donetsk before they can consider joining Russia. So today, the member of Russian parliament Sergei Mironov mentioned that there is no limits how many Ukrainian territories can join Russia. What he basically means here is that all these territories such as Crimea or Donbass are extremely fortunate that now these people will become Russians and not Ukrainians. And at the same time, he also added that he is extremely convinced that people on different Ukrainian territories, such as for example Odessa or Kharkov, are very afraid that Russia is gonna forget about them and not liberate them from Nazis. He proceeds by saying that he knows that these Ukrainians, they want to become Russians. And I mean, I have no idea where he gets this information from, but it's most certainly not from the Russian YouTube channel. The same good old pal who already made plenty of statements today made another one, saying that Putin is not planning to close this window to Europe, which was previously opened by the Peter the Great. What he basically meant here is that Russia is not planning to self-isolate and to once again lower this Iron Curtain. But what I honestly think that in reality, Dmitry Peskov is somehow subconsciously preparing the population of Russia that in case this happens, Putin will be blaming the West. So this message will not be received as something like, okay, we closed our borders because they're bad. Which basically means that in this case, people will be like, okay, so it's you who closed the borders. But instead, this message will be interpreted as following. Oh, these evil Western countries, they're isolating Russia, and so now we have to become self-sustainable and self-sufficient country. And in this case, people will be like, okay, yes, we don't need America, we don't need Europe, we only need Russia. Today, not for the very first time, the representatives of Kremlin said that they do not deny the fact that the presidents of Russia and Ukraine must meet and discuss the situation in Ukraine. But as always, they say that this meeting will not happen until some kind of document is presented to both countries. And according to them, this document must include the positions that President Putin and President Zelensky will be discussing. So basically, most of you already knew about this, and especially the fact that President Zelensky always saying that he's ready to meet with Putin anytime. But at the same time, Russian side and especially Ramzan Kadyrov says that Zelensky should become a man and he must finally face Putin. Which begs the question, who needs to become a man here? But the reason I started saying about this potential meeting once again, it is because the representatives of Kremlin gave us a little bit more details today. And according to the press secretary of Russia, Dmitry Peskov, the work on this alleged document has stopped long time ago, and since then it has not been been resumed. So it's basically like, yes, Putin wants to meet with Zelensky, but we just need to finalize this document, which we are not working on at this very moment. But it is President Zelensky who doesn't want to meet with our Putin. So if you remember, just like a couple of weeks after the beginning of this war, Facebook allowed to send death threats to Russian soldiers. As a result of this, Facebook and Instagram are now considered to be extremist organizations on the territory of Russia. And the first thing Russian people did, they obviously started to use VPN services, which basically allows them to change their IP addresses and connect to these social medias from allegedly different countries. Even some higher government officials, such as for example Dmitry Peskov, acknowledged that they were using these VPN services to access the same Instagram. But today, Russian Federal Agency of Supervision of Media, yes, we have this federal agency, acknowledged that now they're considering all these VPN services to be prohibited, which obviously means that they'll be limiting the usage of these VPN services, and most likely they'll even consider this to be a criminal penalty if you do so. According to them, using VPN services implies that you're threatening the security of Russia. But what they really mean, I think, is that in case you're using Instagram and see that other Western countries, they actually do not have Nazis and there are pretty good people there, it means that you're becoming anti-Russian. Because federal TV channels show you that everyone else except Russians are bad people, and now you see otherwise, which creates discrepancies. So for this reason, this federal agency decides for yourself which one and only correct truth you should be exposed to. Today, the Minister of Finance of Russia, Anton Siluanov, mentioned that Russia will need to attract private investments in order to reconstruct roads in Russia. Which is like, no, not the foreign investments, not the money of oligarchs who stole it from Russia, not the government of Russia, but regular people of Russia. They're the ones who will need to pay for the roads. And this is in addition to previous statements that this will be the Russian people who will be paying for the post-war reconstruction in Ukraine. And I mean obviously not the entire Ukraine, but those areas which Russia considers to be liberated. So it's basically like, imagine a rich person and a poor person going to a very fancy restaurant, and rich person in this case is the representative of a Russian government, and poor person is just a regular Russian person. And then the rich person proceeds to order whatever they want, like lobsters, steaks and all these kind of things. And poor person is like, no, I'll just be with like water and bread. And then when the dinner is over, the rich person is like, okay, put this on this guy's tab and I'm leaving. And just before this rich person proceeds to start leaving, he goes to this poor person and says, we are doing this for Russia. You should be feeling patriotic about this. Thank you so much for your attention. Check the link in the description, stay safe and see you tomorrow.